to let you know I'm recording this. I'm Emily Thompson. I am the Director of Donor Services at CFGG, and today I am representing our development and grant staff to facilitate this conversation. We are recording this and we'll share it on our website and social media. And if this is your first time here, I hope you'll go back to the CFGG website to see previous adaptive philanthropy webinars that have been recorded. Please mute your microphone. Help this run the most efficiently. Please, any questions you have in the chat box, and we'll answer those questions as time permits. Okay, before we start talking about how you can narrow your giving, as well as the practical parts of giving, I wanted to just remind ourselves where we've been in the last year by taking you into my world as a working mom in the middle of a global pandemic. I will quickly set the stage for you. Last year at this time, I had 3 kids living in my house, my 2 kids, as well as our international student from China, who was a senior in high school. The words Corona, Zoom, social distance, TP, and PPE were all beginning to become a part of our regular conversation. My husband, who works for the city of Greensboro, is home now full-time, and we started working at our dining room table together. It was really sweet until it wasn't. It didn't last long. We learned very quickly how to wipe down all of our mail and packages, what grocery store delivery was, what the best leggings were sold on Amazon, and how slow our internet connection really was. Important meetings, maybe with some of you, were interrupted by a 9-year-old who needed math help. It was quite a chore feeding all 5 of us. It consisted of family basketball games in the driveway, and there were so many Zoom meetings. Each day, 5 o'clock would arrive and we'd have socially distanced drinks in the neighborhood in the driveway. We'd cook dinner for all those kids yet again, and then we'd go to bed and we'd start it all over the next morning. Although we never, ever left our house, we were very good about it. It was the most exhausting couple of months I have ever lived through, including the newborn years. As we've learned in our adaptive philanthropy series last year, children and their parents are hungry in our county. Many kids in Guilford County were in school, at home, and in cars and parking lots, learning with Wi-Fi offered by others. And many of those kids are just now going back to school in the last couple weeks. Healthcare in low-income areas continues to be threatened with inequities, and mental health officials are predicting that treating families and individuals experiencing trauma related to the pandemic will go on for years. My family is incredibly fortunate, and there were very, very happy days having all of us at home for so long together. But our fortune is a hard pill to swallow on the days we wake up to news of Black and Asian Americans being killed, seeing long lines at food distribution sites, and knowing as long as kids are out of school, some of those kids are at home in situations that are not ideal. My own privilege over the last year has made me want to give back even more than prior to March 2020. And luckily, there are so many organizations right here in our backyard in Guilford County that are doing the work and that we can give back to. So with that, I want to know what your causes are. What is important to you? I'm going to launch a poll here, and I would like for you to choose. You have about 30 seconds, or maybe a little more if I don't see any responses yet, where you can choose 3 of your top causes, and then we're going to share these. Nice. "15 of 26 people have voted. Can y'all see that? 73% have voted. "88%. All right, there's 3 of you left. 2. Okay, I'm going to end the polling. 4 people responded. Maybe one of those is me because I can't respond. Okay. Sharing results. This is the first time I've done a poll in an adaptive philanthropy session. Okay, so as you can see there, housing is a big concern or cause that you all support here in Guilford County. Also education. A few of you said other. I would love to hear what those are in the chat if you feel comfortable sharing those. Food, of course, is a cause. Not many of you are supporting animal welfare, but that's okay. Healthcare, of course, youth, education, economic development. Thank you for sharing those. I'm glad we have this recording because we can write those down and know voting access and rights. Thank you, Jim. That's a great one too. So I am now going to send it over to, as soon as I figure out how to get this off the screen. Sorry about that. So I'm going to have Kevin Lundy join us. He is going to walk through our Grow the Way You Give booklet, which I have here. As soon as he goes through that, I will also ask that you put your name in the chat box if you want to receive one of these hard copies of our Grow the Way You Give booklet. So Kevin, let's hear from you.
Thanks so much, Emily, and good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. And so thought would start this portion of jumping into the Grow the Way You Give booklet with an image, or just an image in your mind, this image of a squirrel. So I'm not sure how many of you have seen Disney Pixar's 2009 animated film titled Up, but it's a really terrific piece that pulled deeply at your heartstrings. If you haven't seen it, highly encourage it. So in this movie, one of the main characters is this charming, funny, loyal dog by the name of Doug, who you see here in this picture. And if you've seen the movie, you'll know that Doug and his friends had a weak point and a focus, and that was squirrels. And so anytime a squirrel passed by, they would lose focus on what they were doing and focus exclusively on squirrels. And so I'm going to paraphrase a little bit here from Mike Green, a contributing writer to the Business Journal. But this has been something that you've seen or experienced with your own dog, I'm sure, or a dog around town chasing squirrels and that type of thing. And so as we were putting the session together, one of the things we thought about was really, what are the squirrels in our life? What are the squirrels in my life? What are the squirrels in your life? For me, some of my squirrels might be Netflix, it might be going for a hike, a next big project, or honestly, any number of things actually. And so a question for you as you're thinking in general about your life and your work and your priorities, and certainly about your philanthropy, kind of thinking about, what are your own squirrels? What are those kind of things? It might be something that's shiny and different. At other times, it might be returning to something that's old and familiar. So that's going to play a little bit of a role, kind of the squirrel idea, as we move forward into the Grow the Way You Give booklet and thinking about focus and priorities and that type of thing there. So as we go through the booklet, we're going to kind of touch on 3 things to start off with. We're going to start off with thinking more about your current giving. Then we're going to touch on values and an exercise there. And then a brief exercise on focusing your giving. And these are by no means comprehensive, but they are, I think, a really good place to start that our team has kind of worked collectively on developing here. And so the first is starting your journey. We've called it Starting Your Journey, but we've really found this to be a helpful tool, regardless of the place you're in life, in your philanthropic life and in engagement. And as you can see here, some of the text is small, but I'll just touch on a couple high points that'll be included in the booklet. We believe that everyone, regardless of net worth or income, should have a personal giving plan and some strategy. And I think for a lot of folks, and certainly myself over the years at times, if I was asked this question at the top of, do you plan your philanthropy? The answer is no. And, if you don't, you're not alone. Most people do not plan their philanthropy. And so, this first page here is taking a look at, what are the 5 largest grants or investments or gifts in general that you've made throughout the past year. And so not comprehensive again, but kind of a snapshot of what are the 5 largest dollar amounts that you've given into what organizations and what causes, and pulling the curtain back a little bit and saying kind of what was the impetus behind those gifts? Were they friend driven or life driven, impulse driven, mission driven? And also to think about your own personal time commitment in those and your investment in those groups in a variety of different ways, whether it's through volunteerism or board service, but just kind of a quick snapshot, taking a temperature of where your most significant investments over the past year have been. So we've taken a snapshot. Moving into the next slide, these are just some excerpts from the booklet. The next slide is really focusing on identification of values, which I know that all steps of any given process are important, and certainly this one. But if I have a favorite, I think the identification of values is really at the core of a lot of this work for me. It's at the core of who we are, how we invest our time, our energy, our talents, our resources, and our lives. And ultimately, we would hope that our actions are in alignment with our values. I think that's a grand hope for many of us. It's something we strive for. And so this is a really interesting experience. Some of you may have done this type of exercise before, but where we take this kind of lengthy list of values that, we've pre-populated here, and some blanks for you to identify your own that maybe we've missed. But to start from a big list, narrow those down to a top 10, then from there, move to a top 5, then a top 3. I've done this a few times over the years, and it's changed slightly over the years, which I found interesting. As we grow and age and learn, I think there's some natural changes that happen. But in the identification of values, I think coming away with the top 3 things that are kind of nearest and dearest to you. And you'll find some interesting intersections, I think, too, as you identify those values, and you'll start to see commonalities between those values, perhaps in the organizations you're supporting and kind of the circles and folks you're talking with and in relationship with. So I think some really interesting identification of values work there. Again, a start. It's a start of kind of that work in deepening philanthropy. And so from identification of values, the next excerpt from the booklet really moves into focusing your giving, which is the questions around focusing giving are really some of the most frequent questions we receive here at CFGG. And it's really hard to do, thinking about, all the needs we've been aware of or that we've become aware of over this past year. The first documented case of COVID in Guilford was last week, a year ago. So we're, just at a year after the first cases in Guilford County emerged, and would be, really curious, just by a show of hands, have you been overwhelmed at some point in the past year by all the needs and opportunities? On a maybe minute by minute, day by day, hour by hour basis, kind of, I saw basically all the hands I could see going up there. I think, too, when we see this list too, a list like this, even in itself, can be overwhelming when we start to look at the issues listed here and knowing that there are many more. When we look at a high level too, they can seem intractable. I think so. Finding our places in each of these issues where we can, individually and most importantly, collectively make a difference, I think is really, really important. And it's not easy. And this is one of the places we found the worksheet to be especially helpful, is kind of narrowing down from a big list of issues down kind of to a top 3 and seeing the intersection between some issues. I think we've worked with some folks, some fund holders and donors who have had an interest in several of these areas. And through conversation and connections with local nonprofits and organizations, working on the ground, I've been able to connect folks with some really interesting projects and work happening collaboratively at the intersection of a variety of areas. So we found it helpful for us, helping to advise folks and walk alongside folks through the process. And as donors and fund holders and partners are kind of moving through their journey, it's been really helpful as well. And again, these three are kind of these excerpts are kind of a high level look into, a stepwise motion, I think, into developing deeper connections to particular issue areas and connections with your own values. And, of all the years, focusing giving in 2020 has been one of the more challenging years. I've been here at the Community Foundation for 9 years, and before that, spending time doing a lot of neighborhood and community organizing work in High Point. And this year, as we've all heard, I won't dwell on it, but it's been relentless in so many ways, and relentless for so many of our friends and neighbors at the margins. And so, there are a variety of ways that we have connected and opportunities to connect, whether from emergency assistance and immediate needs to, we've seen so many issues systemically that have been revealed, or we've seen fragility in systems or systems change that needs to happen. And so to talk a little bit more about that aspect and, several different types of giving and the importance of different types of giving, I'm going to pass it over to my friend Steve Hayes with the Guilford Nonprofit Consortium. We'll talk a little bit more about the consortium later, but Steve, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me today. For some reason, whenever we talk about giving, the metaphor of fishing always comes up, and cliche that we use a lot is a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. If you give a man a fish, he eats for the day. One that I always liked a little bit better was, if a man walks down to a river and you see a fish floating belly, ask yourself, what's wrong with fish? But what happens if you start seeing lots of fish floating belly up? You start asking yourself, what's wrong with the river? Well, the situation that we've been the last year has allowed us to look not only at what's wrong with the individual fish, but a lot of rivers that we found out had problems with them. And so when you're looking at your giving, we look at reform, we look at prevention. Relief is the who. It's the direct giving to help people or help animals or help causes that you have been directly impacted by. Prevention, how do you keep it from getting there to begin with? And reform, that question is the what's wrong with the river. One of the cool things about working with nonprofits is that there are organizations that deal with the who, that deal with the what, and that deal with the why. Let me give you an example. If you're interested in helping, I know only 4% of you are interested in animals, but I'm a cat person, so I'm sorry. So there's an organization called the Feral Cat Assistance Program. So that would be a relief organization. They go in and find cats that are living in feral colonies, and they try to help them. Prevention would be an organization like Animal Foster and Rescue. They not only take the animals out of those feral situations, but they try to find homes for them so that they don't have feral colonies around our community. And then you have an organization like the Humane Society, who has a great spay and neuter program. That is a reform. That is a system reform, trying to teach folks to spay and neuter their animals so we don't end up having to have feral cat rescue organizations. So when you're giving, it's not just the who you're giving to, but it's also can be the why. Maybe a more important issue for you would be education. Many of you chose that one. There's an organization that I like called Crossroads that works with young men who are either have dropped out or not doing well in the current school system. Gerard Truesdale runs that organization. If you go back to prevention, there's an organization called Operation Excel that works with young people who are at risk of dropping out or getting to that point, and works in communities with high risks of dropout. And then if you look at system reform, there's something going on in Guilford County now called Ready for School, Ready for Life. that starts with early childhood and says we're going to start there and reform our system so we don't get to the end and have to worry about how do we find resources for these young people who just didn't fit into our school system. So who, what, and why? You know, several years ago, well, it wasn't several, it was many years ago, I used to be an HR manager, and one of my jobs was to hire social workers. And we did a really good job of asking, you know, behavioral questions and getting their knowledge. But I don't know where it came from, but one day we asked the question, it came up, so why are people poor? Why are people poor? And the answers that we got were so revelatory that we started asking that every time we hired a social worker. Now, I am not presumptuous enough to say that I know the answer to that question, or that there is only one answer to that question. But what I found when I was making a hiring decision, that if I asked that question, I would find out if somebody had ever actually thought about it and how deep their thinking had been about that question. And were they interested more in dealing with the who, or were they really interested in looking at systems and reform? And so I think that would be a really good question for us to ask ourselves when we're looking at our giving strategies. Am I interested in the who? Am I interested in moving up the river and asking those big questions? One of the good things about Grow the Way You Give and about working at the Community Foundation, there are a lot of people around who can help you make those decisions for yourself and come up with answers to those big questions. The consortium works on the nonprofit side in helping folks develop strategies. Julianne Cooper knows a lot more about the other strategies in giving. So Julianne, I'll turn it over to you for the next part.
Thank you, Steve. As Steve said, my name is Julianne Cooper. I work as a planned giving associate at the Community Foundation. I have a CPA, and I also have a designation called Chartered Advisory and Philanthropy. And you can also probably hear I'm having my lawn mowed, so I hope that's not too distracting. But an important part of your giving is considering the tax strategy. So more of the dollars that you give can go to the issues you care about. So everyone's situation is unique. So I would recommend you talk to your tax advisor if any of these things sound interesting to you. But here's some things you might want to consider. When we talk about giving strategically, the Donor Advised Fund is a great place to start the conversation. A donor advised fund is an investment account that provides a simple, flexible, and efficient way to manage your charitable giving. And it really jumped into the spotlight after the tax law changes in 2018. And as this graph shows, before the tax law in 2017, 30% of taxpayers itemized their deductions. And in 2018, we saw only 10% of people itemizing their deductions. And what that meant was in 2018, a lot less people were getting a tax benefit for their charitable giving. On the next slide, you'll see that even though in 2017, your charitable contributions plummeted into 2018 by 60%. So it's important to note that charitable contributions as a whole didn't decrease, but just people who were able to get a tax benefit for those charitable contributions decreased because of the changes in the tax law. The other thing to understand is right now when standard deduction is higher, some people use the donor advised fund to bunch deductions. Bunching means, like, for example, if I typically give $5,000 a year, I can donate $20,000 in a year, get a nice tax deduction, and then grant out $5,000 over the next 4 years. And therefore you're getting a tax benefit, even though you normally wouldn't have if you were just giving $5,000 a year. Another strategy to talk to your tax advisor about is, it's often used in conjunction with a donor advised fund, but doesn't have to be, is gifting stocks and mutual funds. We all know that right now the stock market is at an all-time high. And when you give away securities to your donor advised fund or to your favorite charity, you can deduct typically the current market value of your stock, no matter what you paid for, or even if that stock had been gifted to you by a grandparent or someone else. This is a very attractive option to a lot of donors, and we saw a big surge in donations into our donor advised funds at the end of 2020, and we frankly still are seeing a lot of donations going into our donor advised funds now. And the final option is that I wanted to mention was for donors who were required to start taking money out of their IRAs. Typically, when you withdraw your required minimum distribution from your IRA, it is taxed as ordinary income. Some of our donors are using what's called a qualified charitable distribution and taking that deduction directly, taking that withdrawal directly from their IRA into and giving it directly to a charity. Now, you can't put an IRA required distribution into your donor advised fund, but there are a lot of other attractive options, and it is a very tax efficient way to donate to your favorite charity or one of our endowments or any other funds similar to that, as long as it's not a donor advised fund. So again, I wanted to just kind of interject that if there's causes that you really care about, that there are some giving wisely ways that can help make more bang for your buck as far as getting those resources to those charities. So I know I ran through that quickly. Again, I'm happy to talk to people afterwards. And also, like I said, it's best to talk to your tax advisor because they know your unique situation. So I'm going to pass it back to Kevin to talk more about the considerations when supporting your favorite causes.
Hey, Julianne, thanks so much. I think that's a perfect transition of thinking about grant making and investing with intention and kind of what you just shared and where we're going here. So I know we've already started this conversation a little earlier in the hour, and as we move into the next slide, I think one of the things we'd love to touch on is around grant making during times of crisis. One of the great resources in the field that we have and that's accessible and available to all of you on this call as well is the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. And so, whether immediate disasters that we might think of like hurricanes or tornadoes, or longer term slower moving disasters that we might think of, they're an extraordinary resource. And they have kind of 3 top tips or top things for us to be thinking about as we think about making investments with intention, especially during this time and in this place and in this period. First is, it's really important for us to think about today and the long view. And so that, is with the last few crises we've had, thinking of the tornado in East Greensboro in April of, a couple years ago, then now with the pandemic, it's been really important for us to try to think about the immediate term, the medium term, and the long term. That yes, there are needs today, but there will be needs for years to come as a result of what we've been experiencing and many of our neighbors have been experiencing. And that flexible funding will be needed throughout. I know Steve touched on this a little bit earlier, and but there's a big need, in addition to systems change and reform work and immediate urgent support, a big need for flexible operating dollars for organizations so that they are able to continue to be open and do the things that they do and provide those critical services. The next recommendation is using data and learning from prior crises. There are often lessons learned that could be used to create better policies and procedures. I think we've seen several of those here locally, in Greensboro following the tornado a few years ago. I think the structure and response there has greatly informed our community-wide response to COVID-19 in community collaborations we've seen. It's been pretty extraordinary. So that's one example of a way that I've seen data and learnings being incorporated. And you certainly have your own data and learnings that you're exposed to on a regular basis. Would really encourage you to tap into those or to reach out to us if there are resources that you're looking for that we can connect you with. I think that's one of the greatest opportunities is for connection, which brings me to the third recommendation around connecting with other funders in this extraordinary opportunity for collaborative philanthropic response to maximize value of human, financial, and technical resources. This could be, with a group of friends, a group of folks you've never met, could be in partnership and alongside the community foundation, as well as we look at those immediate, medium, and longer term needs and how we might collectively work together with our collective, again, shared values, shared needs and opportunities that we've identified through the work that we've been doing, and then coming out, in collaboration with each other. So just a few opportunities and learnings there, takeaways from the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. And don't want you to think you're missing. If you haven't written down or copied anything today, we'll also be sharing this, the PowerPoint deck afterward today so that you'll have access to links and names of organizations and things like that. And so with that, I thought we'd move into the next few slides of example funding considerations. So some of the things that foundations locally and around the country might look at when looking at proposals or requests are listed here on the screen. I won't read through all of these, but I think for many of you, these will not be a surprise that these are part of considerations that funders are often yourselves probably are taking into account when talking with organizations, when learning about organizations. And just wanted to put these out there as kind of a resource or a framework in case helpful. So moving forward, on the next slide, my colleague I see here on the call, Tara Sandercock, has over the years developed this pretty incredible top tips for grant seekers. And I probably in error crossed out grant seekers here and added grant makers, but it's really for both actually. As we were putting today's session together, I was taking a look at the top tips for grant seekers and for organizations. And then when starting to think about top tips for donors or potential donors, for fund holders, for folks interested in helping out, I found out, I think the top tips are really pretty similar as we work forward toward, in many cases, the same goals. And so 6 of those that kind of, rose to the top was around, just like we would ask grant seekers, and recommend that they do their research. Same on your end. I really encourage you, if it's connecting with us, connecting directly with organizations, us providing a vehicle or way for you to tap into some research to be perhaps get a little deeper on areas and issues that you care about or that you'd just like to learn more about. Maybe you don't know much about them, you'd like to learn more. I think that's something we can help you with. And as you've heard from Steve, that he certainly can as well in the consortium. Next, building a relationship. Often talking with applicants and grantees, we encourage building relationships with funders and donors. And I think likewise, working the other way, I think with relationships being mutual, I think, as a person with interest in funding an organization or existing funder, I know it's been hard during COVID, but I'm hopeful that here before long, we'll have the opportunity to go out for some in-person site visits and be in the places people are and see what they're doing and learn about it and hear about it face to face. So same with partnership. I won't go too deeply through all of these, but partnership, realizing and acknowledging that the work in front of us it has to be done in partnership to really be effective. And so perhaps through funding, you could encourage partnerships or support partnerships. We ask grantees and applicants for funding to share their enthusiasm in nonprofits. I think likewise, it's really awesome for us to share our enthusiasm and support back with them, on the ground doing this critical work each and every day. I think very important. And I won't dig too deeply into the last two, but need and financials as well, opportunities for us to dig in and ask questions and to learn and just to be curious. And I love seeing that in the comment. More requests for the Grow the Way You Give booklet. I think it's a really helpful tool, and yes, we'll certainly get those out to you. And my cat is actually closed outside the door, but another cat person here for the record. And so to kind of bring it home, I think my last slide here before I pass things over to Steve Hayes, just wanted to put up on the screen a selection. It's a small selection, 6 kind of projects, funds, programs we have up and running here at the Community Foundation that I know many of you have heard about. But as organization-wide, we think about capacity building. We think about implementing and building and sustaining partnerships and our work in that space. We think about strategic partnerships and investments, our strategic endowments, capacity building throughout the sector from the grassroots level to the institutional level. And I just wanted to highlight kind of, I won't go deeply into these 6, but just to put these 6 names in front of you to really encourage you to check out cfgg.org. Learn a little bit more about some of these things happening with and through the Community Foundation alongside neighbors around the city. I think there's some extraordinary work happening. And know that all of us on this call, our entire staff, we're probably closing in on 30 strong, but we have an extraordinary staff here to help and assist you in your journey, whatever that might look like, and wherever you are in that journey. And to make connections. And with that, I will turn it over to Steve Hayes, the nonprofit, one of the nonprofit gurus on the call today with the Guilford Nonprofit Consortium. Steve, I might ask you, as you're jumping in, if you might give a little bit about the consortium, but an extraordinary mutual aid network of hundreds of groups around the city. I'll turn it over to you, Steve.
Thanks. And I just want to say, I just got my internet here, carry on without me. And I will try to catch up in the end. So you've gone through the process of identifying the causes that you're interested in, and you've determined that you're interested in whatever part of the river you want to jump in to get involved with the cause that you're interested in. How in the world do you know which nonprofit that you want to give to? Does anybody happen to know how many nonprofits are in Guilford County? 200? 500? 700? Well, there are actually 734 nonprofits in Guilford County, and those are just the ones that file tax returns. If you go to the Secretary of State's website and you pull up nonprofits in Guilford County, you will find 7,000 nonprofits listed, because that includes the ones that aren't in business anymore. So how do you make that decision? Is it the cause? Do you do it by size? Is it a large organization? Is it a small organization? I wanted to tell you a story about a particular organization. And a lot of y'all have heard me talk about this group before, because it's a volunteer-only organization called Horse Friends. And it was started by parents of children who are somewhere along the autism spectrum, and was all volunteer. And when I started with the consortium 7 years ago, one of the first things I did was go around and try to meet with the executive directors of each of these organizations. And so I was going to meet with my friends at Horse Friends. And so I went online, looked at their website, and their website said that they were part of a Christian horse farm. And I thought, well, that's unusual. I've never met a Christian horse before. Here I am. I am 55 years old, and I've been around Jewish horses my whole life. And so I'm going to get to go meet Christian horses today. And so I drove up to the horse farm in northern Guilford County, and my friend Lisa was, when I got there, leading a little girl around the ring on a horse. And I was sitting there watching, and a pickup truck pulled up next to me, and a young man got out, and he went around to the other side, and he got a little boy out of the truck. If you have a child who falls somewhere on the spectrum, you know that sometimes there is a meltdown that happens. It's not a temper tantrum. It's more of a sensory overload, and there is a piercing scream that you know about if you know what I'm talking about. And this little boy was having a bad day. He was completely melting down. And so, you know, I'm an old social worker. I'm trying to normalize the conversation with the dad, and we're talking. And eventually my friend Lisa takes the screaming little boy and leads him away. And I'm talking to the father, and all of a sudden it got really quiet. Have y'all ever been in a room where everybody stops talking at the same time, and it's kind of weird and everybody giggles? That's what it felt like. But the silence was coming from where that little boy was. And when I turned to where he was, the screaming little boy was sitting on top of a horse. And this is what I saw. And I turned to his father, and I don't know that I asked a question. I think I just looked at him, and he went, and he'll be like this for a while after we get home. And it hit me that, you know what? I think I may have met a Christian horse that day. Not in maybe a religious sense, but in the sense that a little boy had a very deep need, and this animal and a group of people from a nonprofit were able to meet him at that very deepest place. That is when I fell in love with nonprofits across our community. And I hope that I can convince you to have that same type of love for nonprofits that I do. Because there are really good nonprofits that don't have any paid staff. There are really good nonprofits that are very large nonprofits. And one of the cool things about Grow the Way You Give and the folks at the Community Foundation is they can point you in the direction of nonprofits that are doing good work. Like me, you may have not have heard of them before. And one last thing I want to say about nonprofits is that you want to work with nonprofits that are doing good. But it's also important that we work with nonprofits that are doing well. Because, you know, lots of people have good intentions, but if I am giving of my talent and my time and my resources, I want to make sure that it's being used as efficiently and effectively as possible. Now, the consortium, we are not the good housekeeping seal of approval for nonprofits. Please don't take it that way. But we do provide the resources for nonprofits to know how to do well. And that might be financial management, HR management, board development, all of the stuff that any other business needs, because a nonprofit is a business at the end of the day. And their revenues and their expenditures kind of have to even up, and you want them to carry out their mission as effectively as possible. So when you're making decisions about your giving, I would just encourage you not only to think about who's doing good, but also who's doing well. And one last thing, I don't know about you, but when I give money to support cats, I really don't care about the Feral Cat Assistance Program. You know, it's cats I like, and I want to support cats. And so one of the things that's really neat about the consortium is that we are organizations that work together, and we bring nonprofits together to work around particular causes so that we're more effective and efficient in addressing them. A good example of that are 7 organizations that we are working with right now to try to form a mental health system of care for people who are leaving substance use disorder treatment facilities, so that they have that support for mental health care as they leave the facility. That's the kind of thing that the Community Foundation offers and that you can get into through Grow the Way You Give. What's the cause that I want? Where along that line can I get involved with that cause? And are these organizations doing well as doing good? If you have any questions the consortium can help with, we are always available for that. Emily, what have I missed and how do we wrap up for the day?
Oh, that was great, Steve. I had chills hearing that story, and I'm surprised that's the first time I've heard that story, because I think many of our staff members have heard that story, and so I appreciate you sharing that. It really helped my thinking. I have a couple of questions that have been sent to me through private messages. We have a few shy people on the call today. One question is, Steve, directed to you. How are nonprofits doing after 2020? We've heard lots of press about some not doing well. So tell us about that.
You know, it depends on the nonprofits. You know, the easy thing is to say, oh, we're all in trouble. That's not quite true. In 2018, about 50% of nonprofits had operating reserves of less than 90 days. We did a survey with the consortium in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, and it was about 72% of nonprofits had less than 90 days of operating reserve. So yes, in many ways, nonprofits are under the gun, especially those that were human service organizations that were thrown into the front lines and trying to respond to what we were going through. What we did find is that organizations that rely on ticket sales, like arts organizations, organizations that don't have many different streams of funding are in trouble. Those organizations that have reached out, that have tried to expand their streams of funding and looked at their business model to say, can we do things differently in the future? Is this an opportunity for us to change how we serve? Those are the organizations that I think we'll see in business years from now still doing good and doing well.
Great, thank you. Kevin, I have a two-part question for you. One of those is sort of along the same lines as the question to Steve. How have grants changed since the pandemic started from individuals? And also, you listed some of the strategic endowments that CFGG holds. Are those giving circles, and what does that mean?
Great questions there, Emily. Thank you. So to start with the first question around, contributions and grants we're seeing from individuals during this period, during COVID, I think nationally, we have seen a really significant uptick in individual giving across the country. Folks, much as yourselves on this call, have been stepping up in some extraordinary ways, which says a lot, I think. And we've been seeing that too here locally in Greensboro and Guilford County. I think that during a time of crisis, there can be a tendency maybe to go one of a few different ways of really to, it's kind of natural in some ways, right? To withdraw perhaps. Or maybe you decide we're going to stay the course. But really what we've seen from a number of folks here locally in Greensboro is folks have gone and really leaned in and have, continued to provide regular, as they're able, regular support to organizations. And we've seen a number of above and beyond gifts too. So I think here at Community Foundation in particular, I'll have to review the numbers again to be exact. But I think from our donor advised funds here in the foundation, we saw an uptick in 2020 as compared with 2019. So that generosity and that spirit, I think, of generosity and volunteerism has been on full display here locally over the past year. And then the second part of the question around strategic endowments, strategic endowments and the question of, are they similar to giving circles? I think a lot of folks do think of strategic endowments here at the foundation in a similar way to giving circles. So perhaps, we've gone through the Grow the Way You Give excerpts so far. So I think about identification of values and priorities. And so with folks who participate in Women to Women, for example, they may have done that work in identifying their own individual values and what they would like to support, and have come together as part of this larger group of folks in a collective giving model. So we see that with Women to Women and their endowment. They've raised just shy of $5 million now, and are granting out over $150,000 annually to organizations. We see the same type of thing with Future Fund, with groups of self-identified young professionals. You too could be in Future Fund, but another group that's raised now over $1 million collectively. With some in the big scheme of things, some relatively small and medium-sized gifts all coming together with a group that grants out and invests $50,000 or more annually. We're seeing that now with a lot of energy, over in recent years with public art endowment. We've got some other groups and funds too, but as of late, the Big Equity Fund, Black Investments in Greensboro Fund, that's our colleague Ethan Lindsay, Director of Community Philanthropy here at the foundation. He is kind of at the core and nexus of that work. It's a fund that's been created and led by and seeded by Black folks and Black leaders from around the community, with the idea that this fund and investments made by this fund in coming years in perpetuity as an endowment would provide some strategic investments back into the Black African-American community here in Greensboro. And, they're working through identification of priorities in their own process. But the big investment, Big Equity Fund, it's a terrific opportunity to engage right now with the Community Foundation, very timely. Please let us know if you're interested in more information on the Big Equity Fund. We can make some connections there. But yeah, in general, strategic endowments I think of is collective giving, a group of us coming together around a collective purpose.
Great, thank you. We're actually getting more questions now, and we're closing in on our hour. So I do want to be thoughtful about everyone's time. I did have one question here. Do you help people distinguish between what makes them feel good compared to what does the most good? And I think that's a great question. I don't know if Kevin or Steve, you would like to answer that. I think they're both important. Giving to what makes you feel good. Steve?
Yeah, well, this is just, one thing that I always advise is a nonprofit often does a lot more than what is advertised. And I see Stephanie on the call, and also I think Laura Way is there somewhere from Arts Greensboro. When we surveyed our nonprofit members last summer, looking for summer feeding programs to support, did y'all know that there were 31 arts organizations that also offered summer feeding program for children, that they were critical in providing childcare and in feeding programs through arts organizations? So it makes me feel good to give to an arts organization. What I didn't realize was the amount of good they were doing apart from just the value of the arts that were there. So for me, you can do both.
Great, thank you. Stephanie asked a question, who you just referred to, for nonprofit development folks. What is the best way to communicate to donors about donor advised funds opportunities? Stephanie, I will tell you that is another thing that the Community Foundation provides to nonprofits. We talk to nonprofits all the time about how to do that communication, and we'd love to talk to you about our donor advised funds so you can better educate your donors. So feel free to reach out to me or to Phelps or Julianne about that. We'd be happy to help with that. I am not seeing any more questions, but I am happy to take more offline if you would like. Like I said, we're closing in on our hour, and I do know that people have schedules. Steve and Kevin and Julianne, y'all are amazing, and we thank you so much. The Community Foundation has a brand new staff member, as in like a week, and we want to thank her for being our behind the scenes coordinator. That is Kate Kelly. I do hope she is new to Greensboro, has never lived in Greensboro, and is coming to work at CFGG and live in Greensboro. So please reach out to her when you can, and welcome her to our wonderful city that we all love. As a reminder, this was recorded. I can't not say that. And it will be on our website and social media by the end of the week, if not in a couple hours. Next month, in May, I'm getting ahead of myself. I think we're gonna have a session on housing. There's a lot of big plans around housing in our city, so please stay tuned for the date on that. And we would love to hear about which causes you want to hear about in adaptive philanthropy. So please email me, call me, text me, whatever you need to do. Let me know what you want to hear about. You can also contact any of the speakers or CFGG employees. And we will be happy to help you. For now, we will say goodbye, and thank you so much for being here today and for being engaged, and we will see you next time.